James Maxwell Supersonic Studios here with you, and let's talk about this new Indiana Jones 4 Kingdom of the Crystal Skull whip that I just got. Now, it should be noted that the fourth iteration of our heroic archaeologist journey set out a new whip, different from the Morgans that have been used in the original trilogy, and the most recent one, with a whip that was influenced by the whip coach for the movie, Mr. Anthony DeLongis. If you know whips, then the man needs no introduction. So this was made by Terry Jacka of Australia, not this whip. Actually, this whip was made by Maloroy Whip Company, but wanted to bring a new level of action and a new level of depth to the whip use in the franchise. And for that, he employed his preferred whip maker to create whips for the movie. This was the end result. So a couple of things about this whip in particular. The last time that I went to Rancho Indalo, I brought a set of calipers and I measured the whips that Anthony had. Now it should be noted that those whips that he has, an 8 and a 10 foot, those were the first set of whips after whips were set to the production. So as close as we're probably going to get to a screen used whip. This whip has not gotten the attention of the Morgans. There is no separate page on Indy Gear with the exact measurements of that whip that people can look at. So I set out to do that. I think that I did pretty well. And then, after seeing what Richard Cottrell of, I hope I'm saying your name right, of Mallory Whips was doing, I decided that is the maker that I wanted to replicate this whip. He's really dedicated himself to trying to get this whip down, which is very important in my view, because this is a different whip. It handles different than a Morgan. It is not simply a Morgan with different knots. And we'll get into some of the distinctions later. But this particular whip is 9 feet long. I couldn't decide between the 10 and the 8 feet. I'm also a huge fan of the 7-foot whip that Anthony likes, again, between the 6 and the 8. So I decided to go with a 9-foot whip kind of as a general overall Indy 4 Bullwhip. Again, I sent measurements to have this replicating some of the whips that I saw at the ranch as close as I could. And then there are further refinements into this design that I might touch on here in a little bit. But it should be noted, like I said, this is not a Morgan whip, and it handles differently because of it. I'll do a little bit of cracking, and then we'll talk differences. We're still working on a rolling loop with this whip. I'm getting a really nice hairpin, but my rolling loop isn't quite where I want it yet with this whip. So, excuse that, we're still working on it. But overall, this is a very nice whip to use. It is comfortable in the hand. Ooh, lots of exterior stuff going on here. I have to shoot my backyard as opposed to the park or something. But tracks readily and easily. Like I said, very comfortable in the hand. And just a joy to use, actually. Very, very close to the whips that I experienced at Rancho Indalo, actually. So, a couple of things about this whip that I think bear discussion. So the internals of this whip are as Terry Jacka used, which is split chrome cowhide. That's the internals he liked to use, which add a certain amount of weight right here. And this is really important to note. The Morgan design, in brief, which, if you're curious, in Whips and Whip Making, David Morgan goes into great detail about how he designed his 450 series of bullwhips, what they were designed to do, and why he made the choices he did. It's a beautiful whip, as Anthony says, designed for direct throws on all 8 angles of attack. Does it very, very well. I think it actually throws the trebuchet or the flick really, really well. All of the weight here in the handle, the steel spike that is the handle, contribute to you throwing weight from the rear of the whip forward. Very directable, but also doesn't want to change direction very quickly. One thing that Anthony has stated he wanted to do was to add, like I said, another layer of depth to the whip work. And to that, he decided that the whips that he was used to using and the maker he was used to using could provide him that, and this is the end result. So one thing that Rich did so this is another evolvement from that. In talking with Anthony and just kind of understanding the design a little bit better, how he thought it would do. So you'll see that although this has a good transition, it is not the transition that you would see. This is more like what the Jacker whips look like, right? With this entire section right here, about here, bound completely, almost completely stiff. This has some flex in it. And what that does is it means you still have the leverage, because whip as a lever is a key component in the rolling loop design. You still have this extended lever. Oh, an ice cream truck. You still have an extended lever on this whip, giving you that leverage that you want, but it's not overly done. I owned a Terry Jacket Delonges whip, and I eventually sold it because the transition just did not break down. It was not very comfortable, you know. This is a beautiful balance of that. I mentioned weight earlier. So Terry has very minimal weight in his handle. All of the weight is above the knot, so all of the weight here is above your hand. So I have a lever here that is throwing weight here, right? Which launches the loop absolutely beautifully. The weight in a Morgan generally is going to be actually behind your hand here in the butt, and then also here in the handle, which makes for a different action. The Indiana 4 Jacket Whip is not a Morgan. It handles differently. And I always find it interesting when people want to talk about hat creases and ribbon color or pleats or buttons or the color of the belt. They never talk about the whips, right? They never get into that level of detail with the whips. Their personal preference allows them to override the not only screen accurate, but the functionally accurate versions of this whip. And I am pleased to say that, in my opinion, we now have a functionally as well as screen accurate version of the Indiana 4 whip being Indiana Jones 4 whip being made. Yeah, I would say this kind of sets a gold standard for that. We've had a few one-ofs, but no one's really making them in serial production. Following as close as possible what Terry Jacket did. I think the big part is the internals, which I said changed the weight. Really important for the construction of this whip. And for that, this is just a really good whip. Like I said, comfortable to hold in the hand, which is one thing that really struck me about the Indy 4 whips that I've gotten to handle, is they're very comfortable. They're very nice to use, you know. Oh, they weigh 3 pounds or whatever. You know. Yeah, might be a little bit heavier, but they're absolutely functional. So, this is, again, a 9-foot Indy 4 whip by Maloroy Whips. And I really look forward to using this whip. I would say one thing that I would notice from a handling perspective is that it has a finer, in comparing it to my 1936 by Midwest whips, this has a finer, and it's hard to say this, it has a finer tip control to it. That's not a knock on the Morgan design, but they both have different briefs, and they both do what they were designed to do very, very well. This just has a slightly finer point to it, not only, of course, in construction, but also, in my opinion, in control and the ability to place it where you want. This is just incredibly accurate. A Morgan is incredibly accurate as well, but this just feels a little different, and to my mind, a little bit more, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but just a little bit finer. For that type of work in the Australian tradition. And it's just a really nice whip. I'm going to try to do a different video on this whip later, but I just wanted to get my initial thoughts down. But needless to say, incredibly pleased with this whip. I cannot wait later next year to get it up to Anthony to see what he has to think about it. But I think we have a winner here as far as a functional and screen accurate version of the Terry Jacket Indiana Jones 4 Bullwhip. Yeah, if you'd ordered one, it's going to be awesome. And if you're thinking about ordering one, I highly suggest that you do, because it'll complete your kit properly if you're in the kit for a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull impression. Anyway, until next time, practice. Stay safe.